Hello YouTube, this is Boston Best 0407, and in this video I want to discuss the red pill, blue pill dichotomy. And of course this goes back to the movie The Matrix, and it's used a lot in the manosphere, um, and it's an interesting concept, and it's one of these things I've been very fascinated by since getting into the manosphere and stuff, because I actually never watched the movie The Matrix. I have no real familiarity with it, so I wasn't really aware of this red pill blue pill dichotomy, before I got into the manosphere. But it goes back to nihilism, and so this video is going to be an opportunity to go back to nihilism a little bit, as I discussed in my video. My changing philosophical views. I gave an analysis of my own philosophical changes, and I discussed a little bit in that. For example, my rethinking of Friedrich Nietzsche and some other things like that. So I think it's interesting because when you look at the issue of nihilism, there's a great deal of misconceptions about it. And I was watching a video from Rocky Mr. E, unfortunately, where he tried to describe nihilism, and he failed at it. One of the things I think he failed at is that he described nihilism. He did a video called Nietzsche is Dead, and this was like an old video, a very old video. But he said in the very beginning that reality is objective, as if to imply that Nietzsche didn't believe in objective reality or anything like that. And I don't claim to be a Nietzsche expert, but he really clearly failed in understanding nihilism because he associated nihilism with left-wing politics. And if anything, I don't, from my understanding of Nietzsche anyway, if anything, Nietzsche was not a leftist. I would not go with that sort of interpretation of him. I think he probably, if he was around today, he probably would have regarded modern liberalism as slave morality. He didn't. Black Mystery didn't understand this. The idea behind the idea of the red pill, blue pill dichotomy of nihilism is not to deny that there's an objective reality or to believe that the whole world is relative or subjective. It's to wake up to reality, effectively. The slave morality versus master morality concept, for example, expressed in Nietzsche, going back to Nietzsche, which Rocky Mystery did not understand in the video I had watched. We look at slave morality versus master morality. You take the red pill in this regard. To become a master of your own destiny, you take a red pill to be woke up to reality, to the actual truth of nature. That master morality, being the original form of morality, was the one in which you took whatever you want. It was the barbarism. It was inherent in nature. It goes back to the book Might is Right by Ragnar Ragbeard, if I'm saying that right, the famous social Darwinist text, for example. Going back to this, it's basically the idea that might is right, but even deeper than that, it's a reflection of the reality of nature itself. Thus, unlike what Mr. E was saying, it is waking up to reality, to become your own god or whatever. But basically, it's to wake up to reality. And taking the red pill is that. And it's funny because I was looking into some different philosophers, Machiavelli, and Plato, for example. And I was also reading about the neoconservative theorist, or I don't know if he himself was a neoconservative, but Leo Strauss, for example. And Leo Strauss was important as a writer who theorized particularly about Plato and classical political philosophy. All of these things, by the way, that I do not claim to be an expert on. I'm not an expert on. I'm a pure philosophical amateur. So, but I'm thinking about these things as an amateur, mind you. But I'm thinking about these things. I notice this. I think a continuity of different ideas here. When you like a, I don't know if a continuity exactly, but a relation, contrast, if you will, between these sorts of ideas. Looking at Leo Strauss, I remember I was reading a little bit of an article on Leo Strauss where he was describing the difference between in the polity, the exoteric versus the esoteric. He wrote about things that gave a sort of a mystical quality to the polarity, and I'm not going to go into that too much because again, I don't claim to be an expert on that, so I don't want to speak on anything I don't know. But for example, with Plato. This idea we find in Plato about the noble lie, the lie that is told of a religious nature, a national myth, if you will, told in order to keep the people in line. What becomes clear in this idea is a sense of a creation of a matrix. And this is, I guess, if you will, Plato advocating, in a sense, creating a matrix. And it's interesting how all of this works. And I think to a large degree, the Matrix isn't necessarily something mystical. Like, you have conspiracy theories who think it's some big thing. It's something that we all do. I mean, we all take part in it. It's part of the paradox of being a living organism. We're big of not even that, of actually of our consciousness. Being a highly evolved life form, we are conscious, but we don't realize what's going on. We don't realize that we are finite and that there are other things going on. So looking at like the idea of the noble lie, this is of course the idea of the philosopher king. In this regard, the philosopher king, the elite, is the only one who hasn't even taken the red pill. He's the pharmacist himself, handing out red pills and blue pills. He takes the red pill and gives everybody else a blue pill, in a sense, and again creating a matrix which everybody lives in. You look at that. You go back to Machiavelli, for example, and Machiavelli discussed what a prince needed to do in order to survive. And this is an interesting concept because it's breaking out of your conditioning. What Machiavelli is saying is look, it's really the basic idea of getting outside of your perceptions. You have to realize what politics is. You have to realize the reality of what you're dealing with. And if you want to survive, this is what you have to do. You have to be seen as being honorable, as being gracious, as being all these things, but also be able to switch. You have to be a chameleon to be able to switch back and become vicious if you need to, ruthless and cruel if you need to in order to survive. This is an expression, a dark, demonic, barbaric expression, an unfortunate expression, if you will, of that same thing. If you want to survive in politics, for Machiavelli, you got to take this red pill of realizing that you have to do these things instead of being a sucker your entire life and following what is merely a perception, a very flawed one at that. And this happens all the time. You can see this everywhere. A lot of times, this is the essential hypocrisy of mankind, right? This is the hypocrisy we all notice, we all criticize all the time, but we often don't know how systemic it is to human nature. People say they love, they care, everything, and then they're doing the exact opposite. I've seen in my own life, for example, plenty of people who express love and devotion and good things on the surface, and then they do bad things. Happens all the time. You don't realize how much it happens. And Machiavelli is saying here to realize that if you want to survive, you gotta adapt. You gotta get used to the way things are. And this again is another example of getting out of your perceptions. And then finally, with Nietzsche, Nietzsche is probably the greatest expression of this. This is an expression that I think is influenced, to my understanding anyway, has influenced a great deal of philosophical, serious, not left-wing, like postmodernist, like Rocky Mystery was saying, but serious philosophical nihilists, such as the anus.com page I linked to in my my changing philosophical views video. And this again, it's the master versus the slave. You living in a sheep society, you're living in a dog take that red pill to become a master of your own destiny. And this is what it's all about, and it's interesting. And then, the final thing would be the red pill blue pill dichotomy. as it occurs in the manosphere. Taking the pill and realizing the nature of women, realizing that women are not inherently virtuous, that they have their own interests, they have their own agenda, that they can be just as flawed as men, that they're not what you could put on a pedestal. You shouldn't, like, as in you shouldn't put them on a pedestal. And all these things reflect a basic truth. Now, if you look at, say, the occult, the esoteric, the mystical, you look at all these things. Now, what we're talking about here, of course, is politics. We're talking about the physical. We're talking about getting outside your perception and dealing with people. But there's a spiritual dynamic as well, and it's something that we've known since ancient times, probably. Plato, for example, was an ancient philosopher. He knew this, and people probably knew this for thousands of years. When you go back to a very primitive man was, very, 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 very primitive man was an animist. Believed the mystical was everywhere. That inanimate objects were alive. That the spirit lived in everything. These are the things that primitive man did. Now, after thousands of years, we, after a while, just don't see it anymore because it's become lodged back into our consciousness. And of course, all of this is ultimately psychological, and it's all in our, it could be very well be all in our mind or how we're perceiving the actual physical realm, whichever is out there. But it is a situation where, or for example, with the spirit realm, we don't see the spirit. If you believe in the spirit realm, that is, we don't see the spirit realm anymore. We don't see it so much because we've shut ourselves off to it, and so we just don't see where the spirits are, and we can't see them. And our perceptions of the physical realm, we take them at face value, and we don't see what could be behind there. And ultimately, when it comes to science, for example, really the truth is that it's not. What we find is that it's not as mystical as we think. We subscribe, say, an anamorphic quality, if that's the right word, I'm saying that right, quality to nature. We give nature the status of human-like qualities and so on and so forth with gods and whatever. But really, when you break it down, it's maybe not that specific. Maybe there's something else. Maybe a lot of it is partly unconscious, and there is no anamorphic quality to it. In nature. And I remember I saw a video with Davis M.J. Arini where he was describing mathematics as being an example of the supernatural. And I don't know anything about these things, so I'm not going to talk about what I don't know. I'm not going to try to make sense out of that. But it seems that there are laws to nature. The more you learn about these things, evolutionary psychology, you find that there is much more going on than what we initially perceive. And the spirit realm could very well just be that. It may not be that there's a monotheistic, anamorphic God with a beard up in the sky, creating stuff. Maybe there isn't that, but there is something more. There is something more going on. And people who have the capacity, the sensitivity, the thought process, the intuitive wisdom, and the rational intellect to be able to make sense out of all this are the people who can change the world not only for themselves personally, but for society as a whole, and be able to teach and to learn and to know. And this is ultimately what is fascinating about this concept for me, because it's really the red pill blue pill dichotomy in this regard is really an eternal truth. It's almost like an eternal reoccurrence, maybe, if I'm using that term right. Again, I always have to point out that I'm an amateur. I'm a philosophical amateur, and this is all my conjecture. But it's something reoccurring again. It's something that we've just always known. It's the fact that it's occurred in the manosphere is very interesting, because it is an eternal truth. That there's a spiritual dynamics, there's political dynamics, there's social dynamics, there's cultural dynamics, there's all sorts of different dynamics to the red pill blue pill dichotomy. And this is, I think, a great term. I really enjoy this difference. I like it because I think it's something that is interesting to look at from many different dynamics, and not just, say, gender, for instance. And that's really, of course, the basis of nihilism. Nihilism is getting out of your perceptions, getting out of social reality. The blue pill is social reality. The red pill is reality itself without our perceptions being put onto it. And it is an eternal truth when you figure that I think every culture has known this. For example, there's this great African proverb that I really like, which is, not everything is what it seems. This is, I think, a great piece of wisdom that I've internalized myself, and which I've probably my greatest value, the greatest value I've discovered in my life so far, is this truth. And it's a truth that has, again, many different dynamics: spiritual, political, social, cultural, all these different things. And it's interesting when it comes into play with gender, for example. And this is why I chose to do this video, because this is going to be a lead-in to a video I plan to do, in which I try to make sense out of some things involving females and their sexuality. And as I stated in my other video, and not even their sexuality, but also it's how they shape society, and it's an examination of many different facets of the feminine. I'm doing this pill as like I said, a lead-in to this. But as it's interesting how this red pill blue pill thing as it relates to male and female relations, and how it's come into play in the manosphere. Because as I stated in my other video, all blue pill thought comes from the female. What did I mean by that? What I meant by that was very simple. Women help to shape social reality. And much of the current world in which we live is a reality shaped by the female. I remember I read an article, and I don't want to say this because I don't want to come off as misogynist, not even because I'm afraid of coming off as misogynist, but just because you just don't know who's out there on the internet and who would decide to give you trouble. But I was reading an article related to both masculinity and some of these issues, but it's also discussing Nietzsche, and it was implied clearly in the article. I don't know if he used these words exactly. I'm going to use that, but going back to master versus slave morality, master morality being in its primordial sense, master morality, and femininity being in its primordial sense, slave morality. That was what was implied. He didn't say that, but this is my interpretation of it. And I'm not gonna put a link to this article in the low bar or anything like that. You just have to take my word for it for different reasons. But there's just certain things that I don't like to get into on the internet, or there's some things I don't want to be seen as promoting. How about that? Let's put it like that. And so, when you're thinking of it like this, it's interesting when many feminists, for example, and many Marxists and leftist socialists, people like that, base the idea of class society off of the idea of that women were the first slave class. There's many of these ideas, such as women being the first slave class. And I don't know if this is a reverse of the Nietzschean concept applied to gender, but when you think about this, and this is also another reason why the MGTOW crowd and their male disposability thing and the MRM and all that's wrong, in my view anyway. But the atypical, the archetype of masculinity and femininity is those differences. Men are masters. Men master the environment. Women nurture children. Men are masters. Women are servants. There's actually a quote somewhere: "Men are masters." I read somewhere recently: "Men are masters. Women are servants." And this is clearly interesting when you consider that I believe it was in the Antichrist and by Nietzsche, where Nietzsche said that in the very early days, the original morality was taking whatever you wanted. It was the guy that was using force. This was the original primordial first primitive morality. And over time, the slaves, the inferiors, all these different people, whatever you want to call them, gradually built up this thing, slave morality, and to enslave their masters kind of idea, with Christianity, for example, being the revenge of the lower classes onto the upper classes. Fascinating analysts One which, when I was a teenager, when I was left-wing, I would have thought was completely ridiculous, didn't make any sense. But now, looking back on it, it actually makes a great deal of sense. And when you think about this, this is where the lead into my next video comes from. And this is how women shape society. Women are the domesticators of men. Women women have helped to shape patriarchy to domesticate men and to emasculate men. And this is all done through a series of tactics which you can only begin to understand when you start opening up to the spiritual, political, social, and cultural dynamics of the red pill, blue pill dichotomy. It's only when you begin to think of all these things, and there's a difference between social reality and reality, that you begin to understand how women help to shape social reality, and you also have to understand the spiritual dynamics of it. That's one side of it versus another side of it, reality. That's how this all works out. And it's interesting because the basis of what I'm going to say in my next video is really the basis of the idea of emotional propaganda. We shape our social reality, but we do so in a way in which reality is subsumed to. How about this? Excuse me, I'm screwing up here. Where we shape our social reality by merely saying that something exists. And I don't want to ruin it for you, because I've already gone on long enough. But in my next video, I'm going to discuss how this all works out and how it relates to women. And so that's the discussion here. That's my analysis of my views on nihilism. Well, not even my views on nihilism, but my analysis of the concept of nihilism within the context of the blue pill, red pill dichotomy. And it's a fascinating dichotomy. It's a great metaphor for life and for existence and for everything. And it's given me a great deal of food for thought. And I hope all of you out there begin to get yourselves out of your blue pill reality, and you begin to start taking the red pill and waking up to truth, and to always be a truth seeker more than anything else. And really, when you're doing all that, you find that when you're being a truth seeker, sometimes you find that you delve into the deepest, darkest recesses of not only existence, spiritually, politically, socially, culturally, but within your own self. And you should not be afraid of this. You should not be afraid into delving into the very worst parts of yourself. And worst is, of course, can be a value judgment. But don't be afraid of the darkness if it allows you to come out a bigger person. And hopefully, instead of staying there, you come out a bigger person for it. That's the idea. It's the word of power. It's being a master of your own destiny. And of course, I'm a philosophical amateur, so this is all my own conjecture. But I think all of these are very important lessons of life, and I will again go back to the African proverb that nothing is ever what it seems, and that perceptions are never reality. And all of you out there in the world, you should know that. And really, when it comes down to, and this does not deny, for example, the value of traditional religion, traditional beliefs. For going back to Plato's noble lie, for example, we all need our noble lies. We shouldn't even be afraid of our noble lies, but we should understand the difference between the lies and the truth, and that's really the most important issue here. So you can go back to anything. You can even be a Christian if you wanted to, but understand the truth. Give your traditions, your folklore, your things, all the things I was talking about in my Changing Philosophical Views video. Give them a social context. Understand scientifically and everything else why they exist in the first place. And again, don't be afraid of truth. And that's pretty much all I have to say for now. Keep being a truth seeker, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.